I'll call the meeting to order.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The meeting has been posted according to open meeting laws.
Roll call.
President Johnson.
Here.
Trustee Alexander. Here. Trustee Nugent. Here. Trustee Renucci.
Here.
Trustee Smalley. Here. And Trustee Wisniewski.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, before we do citizen participation, Eileen is going to give us a bit of an overview of the new equipment.
Okay, so I'm sure you all noticed that you have new microphones in front of you. They're wireless mics. It'll be important that you don't move around the microphones that are at your stations, and they are all numbered. The cameras are connected to the microphone, so they will zoom in on the active mic when that microphone is active. I'm not seeing it happen tonight. We have some kinks we're working out with the system. Depends on how I'm broadcasting. Tonight I'm broadcasting with the materials since we have a presentation on utility rates. Other times it's just going to be the camera view. With that system, it's important that you allow the last person speaking to complete their statement before you turn on your mic. Otherwise, it's going to go to the most recently active mic, so then the camera will no longer be on the person speaking. And then when the meeting concludes, if you guys can remember, I will go around and check, but if you could turn off your mics afterward to save the batteries, that would be appreciated. And it's to the left of the button with the three dots underneath. The left button with the three dots is a mute button, so if you push that while you're speaking, like if you had a cough or something, it'll just mute your voice while you're speaking. And then, just so everybody knows, I did notice with the broadcast last week, we did go just cameras, and there is an issue with the switching. There's a screen that's appearing in between the switching that I have them working on. Thank you.
Eileen, I have one question real quick. The button to the left is the three dots. That's a mute button, is it not?
Yeah, that's what
The off and on button is underneath?
yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. We'll go to citizen participation per Village Resolution 2017-01. Anyone wishing to address the village board during citizen participation will be allowed 5 minutes. Your subject can be anything, whether on the agenda or not. The village board should not engage in a discussion regarding comments because it was not part of the publicly noticed agenda. Upon conclusion of this citizen participation segment, members of the audience are not allowed further comment unless they're participating in a public hearing, or if specifically allowed by a majority vote, the village board do an involvement in an agenda item. And we do have a committee of the whole later on water utility rates, so if you do have comments on that, I'd ask that you hold until there. That said, does anybody have anything? Going once, going twice. I will close citizen participation and move on to the consent agenda. One motion and a second will approve all of the following items. Any item may be pulled from the list and voted on separately.
I'll move to approve the consent agenda.
I'll second that.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, I will make a motion to adjourn to committee of the whole.
I'll second that.
All in favor? Aye. Okay, we are adjourned to a committee of the whole. Brian, I'd ask that you come up and just kind of give us the 5-minute run-through of your slides, and for the giant audience of people that are here, then if we have discussion, we can do that after Brian's presentation.
Sounds good. Seems to be working. Okay. Thank you for having me again. So this first slide, although has a million numbers on it, does try to represent how utility rates are looked at. And just please understand that utilities run like a business. It's different from the governmental funds of the village in that we're providing a service to its customers, and there's certain costs that you need to recover in order to provide that service. Utilities are very capital intensive, and that hits your expenses in two different ways. One, the upfront capital costs in order to put those assets in the ground and in the air can be very high, and as well as the maintenance on those assets can be quite volatile. So here we look at a 5-year history under two bases of identifying what are the costs of the system, the top half being what's called a cash basis, or all cash expenses of the utility, and the bottom half being the PSC basis, or what's called a utility basis. But this is what the Public Service Commission will use. The water utility is a regulated utility in the state, and the Public Service Commission uses the math on the bottom half of this chart to identify where rates should be. So year over year, you can kind of see, looking at the utility basis, there's been a deficit, and as well as on a cash basis, there's been a deficit. Now, the fluctuations on a cash basis are due to the cash-funded capital, which are areas in which the utility did not issue debt to fund cash, or to fund capital, but use cash. And as well as kind of those annual smaller equipment items that you'll typically see that are cash funded, in addition to a debt service requirement, meaning we don't want to just pay for our costs and pay for debt. We want a little bit left over to maintain fiscal responsibility. But you will see fluctuations in that cash funded capital if cash was used to pay for capital. So the PSC method is a little more stabilized, but you can see there's been a deficit, and 22% being kind of where we're at now. On the next slide, we kind of speak to, outside of year-over-year identification of whether or not the utility rates are sufficient to pay for the costs of the system, it's imperative to understand where the utility stands in various financial benchmarks. One of them being cash reserves, because we do have volatile maintenance expenses. You want cash in order to pay for those high expense years, so that you don't have large swings in terms of what you need for rate adjustments. That said, the utility has used its reserves, being deficient in its rates, in order to kind of maintain and not need as many rate adjustments. That said, the last rate adjustment being kind of 2019, you can see that little jump in 2020, and as well as any debt that's been issued would be reflected here as well. That said, healthy reserves, but they are declining. So certainly combining those two factors, we would say the utility should do something with its rates. In terms of where we are going, again, the utility needs a 22% increase. That was shown in that first number chart. The utility has two options. So being regulated by the Public Service Commission, it's not just a vote by the village board to determine what your utility rates are. You have to be eligible for certain adjustments, or you can go for a conventional, what's called a conventional rate case. So that is option one, basically going for the 22% all in one with a conventional rate case. So you have to file a water rate application. Ellers has helped the community with the last two of them. And the PSC will adjust your rates based on the state benchmark rate of return, and that was the math that you saw on that first chart. So again, the adjustment would be all at once. We're in option two. Should your 2022 PSC annual report say that you're eligible, which we project it will, you can use simplified adjustments for the next several years. The simplified adjustment for this year is 8%. That was just established by the Public Service Commission, but that changes year over year, and the Public Service Commission determines that in February of each year. One of the disadvantages there is that it does drain cash for operating costs, and kind of pending those, if you have a high or volatile maintenance year, you could certainly see yourselves either needing to issue debt if you become kind of cash negative on a significant basis, or as well as just over time eventually needing that conventional rate case anyway. So we wanted to take the time to kind of identify what is all on the water bill and what charges would be affected. And so I just wanted to note, looking at a sample bill that we pulled here, you'll typically note on a utility bill in the village, there would be 3 components that would be hit by any sort of rate adjustment. That would be the top 2 that are the water 5/8 inch residential for most residential customers, your service charge, and then also what's called public fire charge. So I'll kind of go over those 3 charges. The water volume charge is the top charge, and that's your amount under use, identifies how many gallons you've used in that bill period. Here in this example, about 11,500 gallons were used, and you times that by the current volumetric rate of $3.85 to get to that amount of $44.61. The volume charge is there in order to recover the variable costs of the system. Some examples here are just kind of the demand needs of the system, identifying that various customer classes use the system differently. We went into a little bit more detail on this the last time I was here in February to discuss those demand needs, but in as well as other variable expenses such as treatment expenses that basically say, as you use, you will have more expenses. The water service charge is a fixed charge that's designed to recover maintaining your existing infrastructure and repaying debt that was used to build that infrastructure. And then the public fire protection charge is a fixed charge as well that's designed to recover the costs of providing water for fighting fires and that extra capacity that's built into the system. So when a water system is designed, it's not just designed to make sure everybody's got pressure when they turn on their faucet, but in as well as to fight fires at the same time. So these 3 charges are all regulated by the Public Service Commission. These are common charges, not unique to the village, but just kind of wanted to identify what those 3 charges are. And the last point being that the public fire protection charge is water only. Please note this does not pay for firefighter salaries or firefighter equipment. Rather, it's the water-related public fire charges. In terms of what that looks like on a utility bill, just wanted to mention this is just looking at what a 22% adjustment looks like. This is not including any adjustments to the sewer bill, but just wanted to provide it in terms of a full bill. So we wanted to depict the sewer bill on there only for discussion purposes only to identify the total bill costs. But that said, 22% on an average bill for a residential user. Again, that includes the fixed charges we just spoke to and that volumetric charge that we spoke to. And increasing those by 22% is about a $25 impact per quarter. That is based off of an average use of 15,000 gallons per quarter. So this will be customer specific. If you use more water, of course, your bill may be impacted differently, but just to provide an example of what that looks like, the example usage being 15,000 gallons, that's a $25 impact to a quarter bill there, or a $100 impact on an annual basis, as you'll see on the right-hand part of this chart. And then note, we do have one affordability metric identified here, just in terms of what that looks like as a percent of median household income, or the combined bill there getting to 2%. AWWA does benchmark Midwest utilities at about 2 to 4% per utility. So to be at 2% based off of that metric is a good place to be. And then we wanted to look at the how are we doing against our neighbors approach. So we did run this as of early March and bills at that time. So you'll see the 2 highlighted items here are your current rates at the various usages. So I'll just say that column 1 is the utility's name, the county that they're in, the utility class, which just basically identifies how many customers they serve, and then the minimum quarterly bill or the flat charge, and this is without sewer. This is water only because we're speaking to a water rate adjustment. And then also looking at what does that bill then do at adding on that volumetric charge at various usages. And so this is sorted based on that 15,000 gallons. You can see that a 22% adjustment does jump the utility about 10 utilities. However, you're kind of still within that 50 percentile range after that adjustment, and as well as there's other communities on here that we work with that will be adjusting rates as well. And so that's kind of an important note in why we put the effective date on there, identifying that, if there's a utility that hasn't adjusted rates in a while, they may be soon. So again, this is a 22%, this is a chart that shows the proposed bill at a 22% increase and what that would look like as a comparison to Walworth, Racine, and Waukesha counties. Then our recommendations, again, do something. You've had increases in operating and maintenance expenses as well as future capital that you'll be tackling. Your options for the water rates are to look at a simplified adjustment. And again, of course, it's pending eligibility from your 2022 PSC annual report. And the other option being a conventional rate case, which is available always. But ultimately, we're looking to develop a timeline around a potential water rate adjustment subject to your decision in terms of the consensus, consensus that you come to tonight.
All right, thank you. I just have one quick question. So with option 2, that would be spread over how many years?
Sure, we had indicated in the February meeting that we would recommend kind of at least getting to that 22%, but understanding that you might need more than that. So we did assume that it goes back down to a 3% adjustment. So that's subject to change pending what the PSC determines, but that would be about a 5-year incremental increase.
All right, so we're in a committee of the whole, so anybody who is here, if you have questions, you're free to come up to the mic and ask whatever questions you have, and we can engage in a discussion on it. Mary's poring over her paperwork there. I give her a minute.
Don't be so hard on yourself, Mary.
While we wait, any questions from the board?
Yeah, I've got a question. So if you look at the last increase, it was March 16, 2019. Do we know what that rate increase was?
Wasn't it in here? Or that was your other presentation, wasn't it?
I think it was an increase that we did all at once. We didn't do the percentage jumps.
Because I'm just looking at was it the second slide? If you if you look at 2019, we had a 31.85% shortfall or rate adjustment needed. So if you could scroll up to that first chart.
Yes. I did want to correct, I had spoken with the board prior and said we hadn't had a rate increase since the 2016 rate case, which was partially correct, but incorrect, because it was a volumetric decrease in 2019 that we had. So I just want to clarify that while we look for the amount. But it was a volumetric decrease in 2019, but we had moved the public fire protection charge wholly on the water bill. It was partially on the water bill and partially on the tax levy prior to 2019. So that's what constituted the increase in 2019, was the moving the public fire protection charge.
And I did find that adjustment if you want me to speak to that.
Please.
So the volumetric rate was reduced 12.5%, but the quarterly fixed charges, just basically adding that charge to the bill, increased 35%, so a total bill adjustment of 10.6%.
So then you look at 2020, we were at 5.92, and then it jumped up to 24. Do projects affect that? Jason? And do we have any other projects coming up?
Well, we have a big one this year that we're gonna borrow for. And yes, there'll be more in the future, more large capital projects in the water utility.
Isn't it true, Jason, then, like, for instance, an example would be Highway 20, when the state came through and we've got to run water through that, that affects this? And then when you're going to do School Street, that affects this? And just like when we did Bellevue in the past, when we ran that, that would affect this also, correct?
Correct.
Mary? No, if you have a question, yes. Please.
There we go. Oh, this is nice. Okay, the one thing that I looked at was the Public Service Commission will overview or look at the proposed rate increase because they are out there to protect the consumers. Because they're the ones that actually do the study on it to make sure that this is a merited increase. Correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, this 22% number, Ehlers is projecting the PSC needs to increase the water bill. But I'm sure that's based on numbers that were presented to Ehlers in the budget as far as what we're doing in the future. You're not pretending, I guess is what I'm asking. Okay. So I think that's what 40 was asking Jason to define is the projects that you have coming forward are going to deplete the cash reserves that we have right now. So therefore, you're asking for an increase to replenish cash reserves for the projects in the future.
I think that was well said.
Yes and no.
Clarify it, Matthew.
So you keep me, make sure I'm right here. So let's take the Highway 20 work. We're not using cash for that. We're borrowing for that. Now, then there's a carrying cost of capital. So we have to pay the carrying cost of that capital plus the principal payments. But the O&M, the operating and maintenance costs are going up. And our reserves have been covering those increases. So this isn't just because of infrastructure increases, this is due to operating increases as well. So even if we didn't do a single capital project, we'd probably still be talking about a rate case. Now, it's not, or a rate increase. Wouldn't be to this magnitude, but these are all things that need to be done in terms of infrastructure is going to have to be replaced at some point anyway. So makes sense to do it while we're doing it during this construction.
Well, that's my goal, is to try and make sense of what you're asking the village or your constituents to understand and to pay in the future. It's a big, big issue. So, because right now I'm looking at the comparisons that you gave me, and I just viewed that very quickly as far as the municipalities around us. And I don't even count Waukesha County. I don't count Racine County because there's more income there as far as per household. So when I'm looking at this, I'm looking at the Walworth County numbers, and those are the ones that mean something to me because of the size of our village, and what we're looking forward to is big, but everyone's going to have to understand why we're doing this. And that's what I'm trying to understand exactly why you're doing this. Because I was looking at our bill, Mr. and Mrs. Nickerson, and the water bill for our rental property next door, pretty similar. But that water fee is more, or the sewer fee has me more excited than anything. As far as the dollars and cents for water, maybe I don't understand the billing process exactly, but the amount of water that you use is what is used in the calculations for your sewer, because the water's got to go somewhere, right?
Yes.
Yes, but I'll just be clear. Any changes that are done with the PSCW for this would not affect sewer rates. That's a different utility.
Right. I heard that several times. And I even read it in the notification that there's no need to raise sewer at this time. However, your sewer bill is going to go up. Is it not?
If your water usage remains the same, your sewer
If your water
charge-
usage remains the same and the dollars and cents increase by $25 for an average household, that's not going to reflect in any way, shape, or form on the sewer calculation? It's purely the consumption.
Yeah, it's a volumetric charge, right?
Yeah.
I love that word, volumetric.
Everybody
It's like,
thinks
it's this long, and what does it mean?
How many gallons you use?
Right.
I'll tell you after the meeting.
I don't know. You can tell me another day. So what I want to understand is that if you do one type of application to the PSC, it's a much longer process. But as a result of that, we're going to actually have to sustain a 22% increase next year. Whereas if you do the short form, which I don't quite understand why there's that short form, but the short form will be a more moderate increase over the course of each quarter until you reach the 22% next year? 5 years. So what we're going to see is very minimal, really, right now, if everything you're saying to me is true and correct, if we do the short form.
Hey, Brian, just to confirm, PSC will only let you do so many simplified before you got to go to a full rate case, correct?
Up to 40%.
So it's not the number of simplifieds, it's based off the percentage.
Correct. For a Class C utility, that's correct.
So because we're at 22, we can do the simplified.
So the rates would go up once a year, not every quarter. That would be an annual increase if you're going for a simplified rate case.
And that's the $25.
No, so the full rate case, they refer to it as the full rate case, is what the Ellers is projecting to be 22%. A simplified would be smaller increases that would happen once a year. The concern is, which Brian, I might need you to speak to, but is if we do the simplified, the cash reserves of the utility are still supporting the utility for a while.
Right, he said that the cash reserves would be diminished.
Which means then the net effect after the 5 years could be slightly more than the 22%.
Plus, if we'd have to borrow, if we have any work that we'd end up having to do.
Right, so if we had a significant maintenance event that occurred during that 5-year period, we might have
Right.
to issue debt, which would then add additional pressure to do a higher rate in one of those simplified forms. Does that help?
Well, what you're telling me is that this 22%, which is accomplished after 5 years.
In essence, yes.
Okay. So The 22% is little by little, once a year. What's the golden month? Is it December when tax bills come out? Is that the favorite month? When does this increase show up? If it's only once a year?
The increase is going to be on all bills going forward if the board decides to move forward with an increase.
That's not what Eileen just said.
No, when you do a simplified rate case, you do it on an annual basis. So there's one increase a year, but what Jason's saying is that increase continues, that same increase on the quarterly bills for that year.
Doesn't go away.
The time of the year is, I mean, that depends on when we apply to the PSC and when it's approved. So I don't think we would be going for a Christmas time increase at this point. I think we'd be going for probably second or third quarter, depending on when we can get everything into the PSC.
If we did file a full rate case, though, that would be this year effective January?
January or March.
And that would be the full 22%. And that would be a huge increase for each individual. Right?
I want to go back to Joe's question, though, for a minute. When we did the 2016, it sounded like we did a 35% rate case, and then in 2019, there was a volumetric reduction because of how they interpreted some of the revenue situations for us.
Who's
which-
they?
The PSC.
Okay.
So that resulted in a net effect after 2019 of a 10 and something % change. But for 16, 17, and 18, everybody was bearing the full 35% increase, is that right? Okay. So this is not unheard of. I didn't say that the number was great, I just said it was unheard of, not unheard of.
Okay.
And I think that's what's important to remember here too, is everything Brian's talking about is based, the 22% number is based on today's, the way the markets and things are today. And as we all know, that can change drastically by next year.
Well, it kind of took my breath away when it's inflation and infrastructure. Inflation is a wild number at this time, just awful. And infrastructure, as we do any improvements, we're going to be kind of at the mercy of that as we find things going forward, because anybody knows that once you disturb something that's old, 4 more things arise. Oh, boy. Okay.
So I've got, sorry.
So everybody here is happy with the 22%. That's what's in our budget.
That's not in the budget. That's the discussion here for the decision.
But the 22% is what you've decided.
We haven't decided anything. We have no 2024 budget.
Okay.
Mary, we don't base the utility budget on a projected rate increase, if I'm understanding what you're asking. So when we did the 2023 budget, we're not going, okay, we're counting on a 22% increase for this.
So how did Ehlers know we needed one?
Because they have all of our historical cash flow and cash information and expenditures in all of our 5-year capital improvement plans.
Because we do a 5-year capital program
Right.
here for forecasting.
Right.
For this very reason. And because the PSC does a forward-looking rate case, if we have the need to do this, now is the time to talk about it, not after we go through the budget cycle. That's why this is coming up now. So if we decide to go forward with one of these options this evening, and then we file that with the commission, then yeah, we would in fact include whatever option that we've chosen in the '24 budget. But we weren't counting on doing any of this year in the '23 budget. So the assumption is that our cash flows would be absorbing these costs this year. That was the assumption, and that's what Ehlers is looking at.
So Ayers is basing this rate increase on past and future, knowing that the cash was depleted and that we're going to have to move forward to reinstate that so that we can afford these projects moving forward. And that's what Ayers was looking at.
Right, so the slide that Eileen has up here, you can see that our cash reserves
Went down.
have gone down since 2018. So that's even after, and see, that, you see that bigger reduction there between 19 and 20. That's that volumetric reduction that the PSC had us change. We had a slight uptick there, 20 to 21, and now it's coming back down. But trending-wise, from 18 to 22, it's down more than $500,000. That's all just cash funding operations and a few capital projects.
And the 2021 number, doesn't that reflect a borrowing? Isn't that part of that reason we see a peak there?
Brian is shaking his head yes for those at home.
So does the PSC take in, they can't look at everybody's numbers all the time, but the PSC was the one in 2020 that said to reduce?
Can you, that was a complicated one, and I don't recall all the details. Can you, what happened with that? A little, try the executive summary version.
Brian, you might need to jump in on this one, but I'll do the best I can, and you might want to be at your ready.
Well, remember,
So-
you don't have to talk rocket science to me, I just need the bare bones facts.
In 2016, the village went for a full rate case, and it was the first time in at least 10 years. We were looking back at 2007 projects when we went for that rate case.
In 2020.
In 2016.
Oh.
So we were looking at 2007 projects. The PSC gave us a temporary increase that was higher than the benchmark rate of return at that point in time, so we could iron out some details of some revenue. There were some projects that were done in 2007 that there were questions on. So we had to go back with more detail in the 2019 time period, and that's when then they reduced the volumetric charge.
So, in essence, they said, you can increase your rate by 35%. And then they said, no, it really should have been a 25%, sorry, it really should have been a 10% increase. And so they took 25% off of that, and that's why you have such a big decline from 2019 to 2020, because that became effective in 2020.
And then in 2021,
We borrowed, and so our
We
cash
borrowed,
reserves
so-
went up.
that ending cash number went up. Now we're back down. So Ayers, looking at our historical data and our future projects, are saying a 22% increase is merited.
And so to Eileen's comment, we did one in '07, or '06 or '07. Now we did one in 2016. Now we're talking about 2023.
Right.
So 7 years instead of 10. I think that's pretty good. I did see somebody who had, in that chart, that hasn't gone since 1998. So I really want to know how they did that. But setting them aside, I mean, you see most of the rest of these are doing something back in, 2020 to 2022, the past 2 years. So the fact that we're having this conversation now, especially in this inflation market, I mean, this was great when we took out debt back in 2020 and 2021. I mean, what a great time to take out debt. Now is not a great time to take out debt, but now's the
Right.
time when the state finally decided to fix the highway, so.
So that's pushing the envelope also. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Otherwise, this is going to be a very fast committee of the whole.
I would never want that.
No.
That's okay.
I just had one question on the, so the adjustment, if we do the simplified, option 2, and say it's 8%, and then are you going to look at it again next year? And what happens if it's 41%? Do we have to automatically do the 40% right away, or 41%? How does that work? Just kind of take us through that scenario of, we do the 8%, what happens next year, do the analysis, and it's above 40?
Sure, so that was in our meeting in February, was one of my comments, was that the capital improvement plan that you have for the water utility, going out 5 years, doesn't speak to what's beyond that, And so I believe Jason had mentioned they're looking at projects and looking at potentially like a water system study to identify those projects, but it's ultimately the PSC's math is based off of what their benchmark rate of return is. That's not necessarily what every utility needs. So this framework that our model provides is basically to say, all right, this is what the PSC would say if you applied today, and that's inclusive of the projects that we're speaking to in Highway 20 and School Street. But you can't, with the PSC, ask for more than that within 1 year. So each year through the financial management plan, we look at a 10-year look at water rates based on that capital improvement plan and assumptions and increases in your O&M. This isn't including all of those assumptions. This is just saying right now. So what we showed in February was looking at spreading that increase over time, but then just simply verbalizing that exposes you to risk in terms of if you have more projects, you might need more than just that 5-year increase of 25%. It ended up being kind of a cumulative increase. So you might need more than that come year 3, if you have another project that comes along, and what the market interest rates are at that time if you don't have cash and we're depleting cash over time.
But what if, like I said, if it's, if we lock into the simplified, it's 8 this year, and then you do another analysis and it's 40, what happens? Do we have to do the 40, or are we locked into the 8, or whatever the 25% is, or 22% over the 5 years?
You're only locked into what you apply for with the Public Service Commission. So
We could always
So to
decide to go do a full rate case. So we could get halfway through this and end up in that situation, then have to do a full rate case.
So I think to simplify, if I'm right, Joe's question, how does that percentage change from year to year if we go for the simplified rate case? Is that what you're asking, Joe?
Yeah, so each year, the Public Service Commission decides this on February 15th. They make like a public notification out on their electronic filing system. That's not very public. You have to know where to look on their website, admittedly. But they acknowledge, they basically say, this is our rate of return that we've determined, and they determine that based off of what the interest rate market is. And so their rate of return is 6.5%. But then they say, if you're below that, you're eligible for a simplified rate adjustment, and it's X% this year. In my tenure, it's been 3% for like 12 years, and then it was 4.5% last year, and now it's 8% because they're recognizing for the first time ever that inflation exists. So the 8% is kind of, there was a lot of pressure from legislators as well, because we were hearing from communities, why isn't it more? Why isn't it more? And I think we finally, got the message out that it does need to be more in the environment we're in. I think there's also an understanding of there's going to be interest rate exposure that's coming with rising interest rates. So I think they wanted to be on the front end of that instead of create more backlash for themselves as a commission.
So in other words, then it could, the following year, it could bump by 12%. I mean, in theory, given interest rates continuing to
Right, it could be
spiral.
whatever it is, whatever they decide it is. However, you don't commit to that simplified until you apply for it, and you can only apply for one per year. Yep. But if, let's say it's 12%, and the conventional says you only need 10% or another 8%, you could go in at any time for a conventional and say, we don't need the 12, we're only going to do the 8, but that's based off of, where you would be. That's not likely, like we've shown here. It's going to be 22% that we would recommend, whether that's all in one or over time, with over time exposing you to kind of cash risk.
Is there a limit on the amount of time in the simplified rate? In other words, is it once a year for 5 years? Is it once a year for 10 years?
Sure.
Well, yeah, it is, but I mean, does the PSC limit us to what can be done?
So the simplified eligibility rules are clear as mud, but for a Class C utility, which you are, you can do one a year. But that's true of everybody, but you can do one a year. The time in terms of how many of them you can do is up to a cumulative 40%. So what if they change it to, 32% the next year of a simplified, then you can only do one more to get to that 40%. But cumulative 40% is where you're at.
What do they make you do then?
Conventional rate case, if you need an
And
adjustment.
what time limit do they give you on a conventional rate case?
You can go in for one at any time.
No, I'm sorry, and again, I'm not the sharpest knife on this, but I guess I'm just asking, right now, I can see you've stretched things out here on the combined rate for 10 years, okay? So in other words, a rate case could last 10 years. I've seen, like in Delafield, they had 25. So, in other words, if we get a rate case and we say, we're going to increase by this percentage, are we made to change that only when the funds are getting short on us?
It's whenever you decide to apply as a village. So you don't have to apply.
I understand. Why are we applying now?
Because you have 4 straight years of a deficit.
That's what I'm asking.
Okay.
Brian, if the board was to decide tonight to go for a full rate case and you're recommending 22%, do you think that would get approved by PSC?
So that's their benchmark rate of return, so it would. And how our process works is that we would essentially complete the application on the village's behalf, and then we come back to the board to say, do you want to file it at this amount? And sometimes we come back with options that say, you can adjust it to this percent, whatever it might be. Right now, that's 22%. We do a trend analysis on usage and other things like that, so there's obviously room for that to change, but we'll be back in front of this board to decide to file the application at the amount based on our recommendations after getting that additional information. Based on your current revenues that you're receiving and the benchmark rate of return, all other things being equal, it's around a 22% revenue adjustment.
What's your prognosis for how long that would last?
The 22%?
Yes.
We generally recommend, obviously, you do a budget process each year for each utility. So at that point, you should be kind of looking at what does that look like. We do a 5-year plan for the village. The 5-year plan kind of identifies doing something every other year, but that's to keep up with assumed O&M increases. So, and that's kind of saying doing the simplifieds every other year. That said, that may not be needed because I can't tell you what's going to happen in 2 years or 1 year, 3 years.
We're still in a committee of the whole. Does anybody else have other questions before we close the committee of the whole? Going once?
I have one question here, and that, I guess, and I have to ask this question, the last rate increase we had, how long did that go for us? How many years?
It's in 2016.
Okay,
That's the
so
last rate.
6, 7 years, give or take. Is that normal parameters, 6, 7 years?
For a a utility your size, I would say we would generally, every 5 years, unless there's a huge system shakeup, and what I mean by that is large projects or large users, either entering or leaving.
Yeah, I mean, we probably went 10 years in the previous one because there was the big recession in there. And we probably were able to ride some of this out due to the low interest rates and the pandemic.
Plus a couple of the large users left.
All right, anything else before we close the committee of the whole to go into final debate on direction to staff? Again, just for those at home and here, whatever the board decides here is not, it's not like rates change tomorrow. This is a discussion for staff to work with the PSC. Going once, going twice. Okay, I'll make a motion to reconvene in regular session.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. All right, we're back in regular session. Miscellaneous business, item 1, possible action directing staff and utility rate increase that we've just been discussing. Any other discussion on this? We have two choices, it sounds like. We can instruct staff to go through a full rate case with currently today estimated 22%. That number is, I guess, subject to change as we refine it. Or instruct staff to proceed with a series of simplified items, which means we'll probably be talking about this each and every year about this time to see, do we need to go do a full rate case for some reason? Or do a debt issuance because we end up in a cash crunch. So I think the question for the board is, what is our risk appetite for option 2?
I guess it all depends about what people desire, what they want to do. I mean, nobody wants to pay higher bills. That I understand. But I also think people would like to know if, as far as household bills, timely bills that are coming every year, every quarter, whatever you want to call it, that you want to know what those are going to be so you can plan accordingly. With a simplified rate case, those are going to change every year, every year and a half, however that works. Whereas with the main change that you're talking about, a 22% across 5 or 6 years, at least you're going to know what it's going to be at. That's the way I would look at it.
So what you're saying is, while, I want to restate what I think you said, while a 22% may not be a great number, at least if you did it all at once, it'd be known and done and people be able to plan for it. That's what you're saying.
That's the way I would look at it myself, personally.
I think with how the economy is and the unknown of what inflation's going to turn into, and the debt that we could possibly take on, if we do simplified, it would just make more sense to do a full rate case right now, my opinion.
Is there other discussion, or would someone care to make a motion? The chair would entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to direct staff to work with Ellers in regards to a full rate case and apply it to the PSC.
I'll second it.
All right, there's a motion and a second for directing staff to begin to work with Ellers on a full rate case. Any further discussion or questions on that? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Brian, thanks for your time yet again. Oh, that's right, he still has to be here. We have the next one. Now let's talk about some debt. All right. Item 2, consideration of 2023 bond issuance and direction to staff.
So we're here to kind of expand upon the financial management plan that we've been conducting since 2017 annually, where we look at your 5-year capital improvement plan and identify how to fund that plan, and that includes a combination of cash and debt. So what you have in front of you today actually is no decision, in that we're going to be looking to get bids on the projects, and this is Highway 20 as well as School Street projects that we'd be looking to fund in this 2023 borrowing cycle. These projects will go from 2023 into 2024 as well, so more or less borrowing for 2 years of those capital expenditures. And so what we're presenting here tonight is just to get a preliminary understanding of the impact on that, and then kind of discuss the process a little bit. So table.
Just real quick, is there anything significantly different in these than what we've gone through, like in our last budget run-through on this debt issuance?
No, outside of a discussion on the next table, I think is imperative to have. So right now, what we're showing, and again, in speaking with bond counsel and this proposed schedule that you have, is you won't be bidding this, Jason, correct me if I'm wrong, until like May 19th? Is this the date?
The DOT project, correct?
Yeah. So there's going to be a little bit of time here, but our goal is to try to issue this in an advantageous manner, meaning that we want to kind of issue before the increase that typically happens in interest rates, as seen in last year over the summer, as there was a 200 basis point increase or 2% increase from June to August last year. So trying to time this in an appropriate manner. We'd be right now on the schedule, and as depicted here, is we'd be setting the sale May 1st, or your first meeting in May, and then we would be having the sale the last week in June, kind of giving that time from bidding the project and actually knowing the project costs to be able to market the official statement to potential bidders and identify what the true dollar amount is. So when you adopt a set sale resolution at that May meeting, it would be before your bidding. So we do have a contingency amount because you set a resolution that's not to exceed. And so we do not want to be under, but rather we can be over and peel back from there. In the inflation market that we're in, and speaking with staff, we thought that a 25% contingency number right now would be appropriate. So that's the only difference that you're seeing to the numbers, is adding that, just so our not to exceed amount is healthy, and we can peel back once we get bids and reduce this borrowing size. But that said, that ends up in a $1.725 million borrowing, where we didn't have that $300,000 contingency before. But again, we would expect that to go down. However, we don't know, with the bidding environment we're in, we've certainly seen some crazy bids in my experience over the past 12 months. So that said, I think this is the advantageous way to go about it, speaking to the timing and then kind of the dollar amount necessary for the initial resolution. This does not commit you to a borrowing of that size, but rather allows you to peel back if necessary. So that is the main change that you're seeing.
You all are just looking for direction that we agree before you need a motion on any of that?
No, actually, I mean, unless staff prefers, I just think it's kind of going on that schedule and for this dollar amount, so we can get the kind of everything in process. And there's a rating that would happen in between there as well.
Yeah, I don't think we need official action by the board, but certainly if anybody is against us moving forward with this, we'd want to know right now. Otherwise, we'll assume that the direction is to move forward with the bond issuance, since this has been part of our financial planning and our budget documents.
I have a question, of course. If you will go back to table 1, please, the first page. And again, I'm not as adept at this stuff as Mr. Johnson is, but I'm looking at some of these numbers, and the only question I've got, you're going to, the existing general obligation debt base. Now, does this include any of the ongoing build-outs in the industrial park?
This, in terms of,
I guess what I'm asking, because I'm looking at equalized value,
yeah,
and that does not increase at all.
right.
And you're basing percentages and numbers and stuff on no increase in equalized value.
Sure. Great question. Kept that as conservative as possible, and it does not include, obviously, we just kept it flat to just kind of understand what the increase is, not saying we're expecting this development, so taxes are going to be flat, because there's just,
So in essence, then, if the increase in equalized value, then it would only be for the betterment of the project.
correct.
Back on table 2, capital improvements, I'm assuming the water is all set then, that we were talking about. Does this, excuse me, the projects that we're talking about for capital, does this improve any of the lift station rehabs?
I think the main driver here was the Highway 20 project this year and School Street next year, right?
Correct.
Okay, because I thought we got 1 or 2 lift stations on tap.
Not with this borrowing.
We have other capital projects.
I just know the fact that it was discussed, and I just wanted to know if that was included in this.
No. However, we did get the hydrants.
Okay, you answered my other question and about equalized value, so that's all I had.
Any other discussion? All right, I think staff, you good?
Yep.
Okay, we'll proceed. All right. I will thank Brian again for his time. Thank you. All right, we'll move on to ordinances. No, wait. We're not going to do item 1. Yeah, okay, sorry. Item 1, we're going to pull for this meeting. It's not ready. It's on the April? Okay. All right, item 2, consideration of ordinance 2023-02, revisions to the zoning code relating to exterior building materials in industrial zoning districts. Everybody read Tim's memo?
I'll make a motion to approve the proposed ordinance 2023-02 as drafted.
I'll second that.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item 3, consideration of 2023-03 ordinance to repeal and recreate Chapter 149 related to a village code of ethics. Item A, consideration of disclosure statement, and item B, consideration of updated personnel manual, new reference to ethics code. And I believe Eileen's memo outlines the changes. We've talked about this a few times, and she included very helpfully a red line version for us. And I believe in talking to staff, this addresses some concerns. So,
I'll make a motion to approve ordinance 2023-03 to repeal and recreate Chapter 149 related to a village code of ethics.
I will second that.
Okay, any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We'll move on to reports. Item 1, municipal court,
No.
I'm sorry.
You got to go back. We
Yes.
got to talk about the disclosure statement and then approve the updated personnel manual.
My apologies, thank you. Okay. What do we think of the disclosure statement?
Motion to approve it? Is that a yes? I'm sorry, wasn't looking.
Yes.
Okay, so then I'll move to approve the conflict of interest disclosure form.
I'll second that.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And then the manual?
I'll also move to approve the personnel policy manual updated 3/20/23.
I will second that.
Any other discussion on that item? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you for keeping me honest on that. Reports. Item 1, municipal court report for February 2023. Any questions? Item 2, February financial report. Any questions?
Yes.
Yes.
On the fund summary for the licensing and permits, that's mostly just the liquor and the bar licenses, is it not?
I believe the permits also includes building permits.
Okay, it licenses and permits, I didn't know if that was liquor licenses or building and,
It includes that as well. It includes liquor licenses, too.
Any other questions, 40?
that's all I got.
Okay, thanks. Item 3, draft plan commission minutes from last Monday, 3/13/2023. Any questions for 40? All right, item 4, Booth Lake Memorial Park minutes, February 15th, 2023. Any questions for Joe? Good night, Mary. All right, item 5, library board minutes from February 14th, 2023. Any questions for Mary? Okay, seeing no questions on these reports, I will make a motion to adjourn to closed session pursuant to Wisconsin statutes 1985-1E for the purpose of conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session, tourism agreement and TID developments.
I'll second that.
Roll call, please.
President Johnson?
Yes.
Trustee Alexander? Trustee Nugent? Yes. Trustee Renucci?
Yes.
Trustee Smalley?